The stagecoach rattled to a halt in a cloud of dust at the edge of Silvercreek, Arizona Territory, 1885, as Josephine Vance clutched her handwritten letter of farewell so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Tears streamed down her face, catching the morning sunlight as they fell upon her black mourning dress, a garment she'd worn faithfully for the past 18 months since her husband Thomas had been lowered into the hard desert ground. The small mining town that had been her home for 5 years now shrank behind her as she prepared to leave forever, her heart as empty as the small wooden trunk at her feet. "Last call for passengers to Tucson," bellowed the stagecoach driver, a weathered man whose face told stories of decades traversing the dangerous routes through Apache territory. Josephine wiped her tears with a lace-edged handkerchief and took one final look at Silvercreek. The town had given her everything and then taken it all away just as quickly. The memory of Thomas's face when they'd first arrived, full of dreams about striking silver and building a grand house in San Francisco, now felt like it belonged to another lifetime. "Madam, you boarding?" The driver's impatient voice broke through her reverie. "Yes, of course," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She picked up her small trunk, refusing assistance. Independence was something she'd learned the hard way after Thomas died in the mine collapse. The same collapse that had taken 13 other men and destroyed as many families. As the driver loaded her trunk, Josephine felt a presence behind her. She turned to find Xavier Nichols standing there, his tall frame silhouetted against the rising sun, hat in hand. He was not wearing his usual attire, the well-worn denim, leather chaps, and dusty boots that marked him as one of the most respected ranch hands at the Broken Arrow Ranch. Today, he wore a clean shirt and his best vest, as if he'd prepared specifically for this moment. "Miss Josephine," he said, his deep voice carrying across the 6 feet that separated them. "I heard you were leaving." Josephine swallowed hard. Xavier had been a constant, quiet presence in her life since Thomas's death. He'd appeared at her door 3 days after the funeral with a load of chopped firewood and had continued to bring supplies and offer assistance whenever she needed it. Never asking for anything in return, never staying longer than propriety allowed. "Mr. Nichols," she acknowledged with a nod. "News travels fast in a small town. Too fast sometimes," he agreed, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth before fading. "I wish you'd mentioned something." "It's better this way," she said, the tears threatening to return. "Clean breaks heal faster, my mother always said." Xavier took a step closer, his blue eyes the same color as the vast Arizona sky fixed intently on hers. "Where will you go?" "My sister in St. Louis has offered me a place to stay until I find suitable employment. Perhaps as a schoolteacher or a seamstress." The stagecoach driver cleared his throat. "Madam, we need to depart now if we're to make Tucson by nightfall." Josephine nodded and turned to board. Xavier's hand gently caught her elbow. "Josephine," he said, using her given name for the first time in all their acquaintance. "My heart leaves with you." The simple declaration, spoken with such raw honesty, stopped her cold. She turned back to him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity, finding none. "What did you say?" she asked, certain she had misheard. "I said my heart leaves with you," Xavier repeated, his voice stronger now. "It's been yours since the moment I first saw you struggle to carry water from the well after Thomas passed. You never asked for help, but you needed it all the same, just as you need it now." The driver sighed heavily. "Madam, I cannot delay 1 moment, please," Josephine requested, her voice quavering. Xavier continued, "I know you think leaving is the answer. That Silvercreek holds nothing but painful memories, but I'm asking you to stay. Not out of pity or obligation, but because I believe we could build something here, together." "Xavier," she whispered, the familiarity of his name strange on her lips, "I've nothing left here." "You have me," he said simply. "If you'll have me." The stagecoach driver interrupted again. "Madam, it's now or next week's coach." Josephine's mind raced. St. Louis represented safety, the known, a return to a life she'd left behind years ago. Staying meant uncertainty, risk, and opening her heart to the possibility of loss once more. But looking at Xavier's earnest face, she saw something she hadn't expected: hope. "Driver," she said, her voice suddenly clear and resolute, "I believe I'll be staying in Silvercreek after all." The driver shrugged, already untying her trunk. "Suit yourself, madam, fare's non-refundable." Xavier's face transformed with a smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that made Josephine's heart flutter unexpectedly. "You won't regret this," he promised, taking her trunk from the driver. "I might," she countered honestly, "but I would regret leaving more." As the stagecoach pulled away, kicking up dust that swirled around them like a veil, Xavier stood close enough that Josephine could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that always seemed to surround him. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly aware of the enormity of her decision. "Now," Xavier said, offering her his arm, "we walk back into town and I buy you breakfast at Clara's cafe. Then we really talk about what comes next." Josephine hesitated before placing her hand on his arm. "People will talk." "Let them," Xavier replied with a confidence that both surprised and reassured her. "They've been talking since the first time I brought you firewood. Might as well give them something worth discussing." For the first time in 18 months, Josephine felt the corners of her mouth turn upward in a genuine smile. "I suppose you're right, Mr. Nichols." "Xavier," he corrected gently. "If we're to give the gossips something to chew on, you might as well use my given name." "Xavier," she repeated, the name feeling right somehow. "Lead the way." They walked back toward Silvercreek, the morning sun now fully risen above the distant mountains, casting long shadows behind them. Josephine wasn't certain what the future held, but for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt something stirring within her that she had thought long buried the faint but unmistakable flutter of possibility. Clara's cafe was already bustling when they entered, the breakfast crowd turning as one to stare at the unlikely pair. Josephine felt her cheeks flush, but kept her head high as Xavier led her to a small table near the window. "Josie Vance," exclaimed Clara herself, a plump woman with rosy cheeks and a perpetually flour-dusted apron. "I thought you'd be halfway to Tucson by now." "There's been a change of plans," Josephine said simply. Clara's knowing eyes darted between Josephine and Xavier. "I see that," she said with a barely suppressed smile. "Coffee's fresh, and I've just pulled biscuits from the oven." After Clara departed to fetch their breakfast, an awkward silence fell between them. Josephine found herself studying the worn tablecloth, acutely aware of the whispers that floated around the cafe. "Second thoughts already?" Xavier asked quietly. Josephine looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "No, but I'm wondering if you might have some. This isn't easy, Xavier. I'm still in mourning and I'm not sure when or if I'll be ready for whatever this is." Xavier reached across the table, his rough, calloused hand covering hers. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, Josephine. All I'm asking is that you don't run away, stay in Silvercreek. Let me court you properly in the open, with respect for your grief and for Thomas's memory." "And if I'm never ready," she challenged, needing to be honest with him and with herself. "Then I'll have had the privilege of knowing you better," he replied without hesitation. "And that's worth more than you might believe." Clara returned with 2 steaming cups of coffee and a basket of golden brown biscuits. "Eggs and bacon will be right up," she said with a wink before bustling away again. Xavier removed his hand from Josephine's as they began to eat, the simple act of sharing a meal creating a bubble of normalcy in what was otherwise an extraordinary morning. "Tell me about your ranch," Josephine said after a few moments, realizing how little she actually knew about the man across from her, despite his consistent presence in her life. Xavier's eyes brightened. "It's not my ranch yet, but it will be. I've been working for old man Pearson at the Broken Arrow for 7 years now. Started as just another hand, but I'm foreman now." A touch of pride colored his voice. "Pearson has no children, no family to speak of. 2 years ago, he offered me the chance to buy into the ranch bit by bit. And have you? Josephine asked, genuinely interested. I own about a quarter of it now, Xavier confirmed. Another 3 or 4 years and I'll have half. Pearson says when he dies, the rest will come to me, but I'd rather buy it fair and square while he's still alive to enjoy the money. Josephine nodded, impressed by his integrity and ambition. That's admirable, Xavier. It's nothing special, he demurred. Just the way I was raised. My father always said a man's word and his work are all he truly owns in this world. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Xavier said, a shadow of old grief passing across his features. Lost him in '65, Battle of 5 Forks, just days before Lee surrendered. I'm sorry, Josephine said softly, understanding all too well the pain of such loss. Xavier nodded his acknowledgement. What about you? Before Thomas, before Silvercreek, who was Josephine Vance? The question caught her off guard. No one in Silvercreek had ever asked about her life before arriving with Thomas. She'd simply been Thomas Vance's wife and then Thomas Vance's widow. I was Josephine Mercer then, she began hesitantly. Raised in St. Louis. My father owned a small printing business. I helped with the accounts and sometimes typesetting. I met Thomas when he came to have business cards printed. He was so full of dreams about the West, about making a fortune in mining. And he swept you off your feet, Xavier surmised. Not exactly, Josephine admitted with a small laugh. I thought he was foolish at first. But he was persistent, and eventually his dreams began to feel like they could be mine too. We married 6 months after we met, and a week later we were on a train bound for Arizona territory. You were brave to come all this way, Xavier observed. Josephine shook her head. Not brave. Just young and in love, 23 and certain the world would unfold exactly as we planned it. And now, Xavier asked carefully. Now I'm 28 and certain of nothing, she replied honestly. Except perhaps that running away isn't the answer I thought it was. Their conversation continued through breakfast, moving from past to present, carefully avoiding the uncertain future that lay before them. By the time they finished, the café had emptied of the morning crowd, and Clara was giving them pointed looks as she wiped down nearby tables. I should get you home, Xavier said, laying money on the table to cover their meal. And then I need to get back to the ranch. Cattle don't wait for a man's personal affairs. Outside, the day had warmed considerably, the sun high in the cloudless sky. As they walked toward Josephine's small house at the edge of town, she became acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Widow Vance walking openly with Xavier Nichols was clearly the most interesting thing to happen in Silvercreek that week. This won't be easy, she murmured, nodding discreetly toward Mrs. Peterson and Mrs. Gunderson, who had stopped sweeping their storefronts to watch them pass. Few worthwhile things are, Xavier replied, seemingly unbothered by the attention. But I meant what I said, Josephine. I'll court you properly with all the respect you deserve. They reached her house, a modest single-story structure that Thomas had built with his own hands during their first year in Silvercreek. Xavier set her trunk down on the porch. May I call on you tomorrow evening? He asked formally, hat in hand once again. Josephine hesitated only briefly before nodding. Yes, you may. A smile spread across his face, transforming his usually serious expression. Until tomorrow, then. She watched him walk away, his tall figure receding down the dusty street, and wondered what she had gotten herself into. Turning to enter her house, Josephine was startled to find it felt different, somehow less like a shrine to her past and more like a place where she might build a future. That evening, as Josephine prepared for bed, a knock at her door startled her. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, she approached cautiously. Who is it? It's Martha Holden, came the reply. Martha was the wife of the mine foreman and had been one of the few women in town who had offered genuine friendship after Thomas's death. Josephine opened the door to find Martha standing there with a covered dish. I brought you some apple cobbler, Martha said, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. And if I'm being honest, I came to see if the rumors are true. Sighing, Josephine ushered her friend inside. I suppose that depends on the rumors you've heard. Martha set the cobbler on the small kitchen table and turned to face Josephine directly. They're saying you nearly left town this morning, but Xavier Nichols stopped you, that you two had breakfast together at Clara's, plain as day. Those particular rumors are true, Josephine confirmed, putting a kettle on the stove for tea. And is it also true that he declared his love for you right there in the street? Martha pressed, her eyes wide. Josephine couldn't help but laugh. No, that part has been embellished. He simply asked me to stay, to give Silvercreek and him a chance. Martha sank into a chair, clearly disappointed by the less dramatic reality. And you agreed, just like that? Just like that, Josephine echoed, though she knew the decision had been anything but simple. What about your mourning period? Martha asked delicately. Josephine turned away, busying herself with teacups. I'm still in mourning, Martha. Xavier understands that. He's not asking me to forget Thomas or to dishonor his memory. No, I suppose he wouldn't, Martha conceded. He's a good man, Xavier Nichols. One of the best in these parts, if you ask me. But are you ready for the talk this will cause? The kettle whistled, giving Josephine a moment to compose her thoughts as she prepared their tea. I don't know if I'm ready, she admitted finally, setting a steaming cup before her friend. But I do know that leaving felt wrong and staying feels right. That's all I have to guide me right now. Martha reached across the table and squeezed Josephine's hand. Then that's enough. And if anyone has unkind things to say, they'll have me to answer to. Josephine smiled gratefully. Thank you, Martha. They talked late into the evening, Martha filling Josephine in on what little was known about Xavier Nichols around town. He was respected as a hard worker and a fair foreman. He attended church regularly but quietly. He didn't drink to excess or frequent the saloon like many of the other ranch hands, and as far as anyone knew, he had never shown particular interest in any woman in town until Josephine. After Martha left, Josephine lay awake in bed, her mind too full for sleep. Had she made the right choice? Or had she simply traded one uncertain future for another? And what of Xavier's declaration, "My heart leaves with you"? Was it possible to build something real from such an unexpected beginning? The next day passed in a blur of routine tasks and anxious anticipation. Josephine found herself changing her dress 3 times before Xavier's arrival, finally settling on a dark blue gown that, while still respectful of her mourning status, was not the severe black she had worn for so long. When Xavier knocked precisely at 7 o'clock, Josephine's heart raced as if she were a girl of 18 rather than a widow of 28. She opened the door to find him standing there in a clean shirt and vest, his hair still damp from washing, a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. "Good evening, Josephine," he said, removing his hat. "These are for you." She accepted the flowers with a genuine smile. "Thank you, they're lovely. Please come in." Xavier stepped inside, his tall frame making her small front room seem even smaller. There was an awkwardness between them now that hadn't existed during their breakfast at Clara's, the weight of intention and expectation making itself felt. "I thought we might walk to the creek," Xavier suggested. "It's a fine evening and there's a full moon rising." Josephine hesitated. A walk alone with Xavier in the moonlight would certainly set tongues wagging even more than they already were. But then, hadn't that bridge already been crossed? I'd like that, she decided, placing the wildflowers in a jar of water before reaching for her shawl. They walked in companionable silence through town and beyond, following a well-worn path to Silvercreek itself, the small waterway that had given the town its name. The moon was indeed rising, casting a silvery glow over the landscape that transformed the familiar terrain into something almost magical. "It's beautiful," Josephine remarked as they reached the creek bank, where a large, flat rock provided a natural place to sit. "It is," Xavier agreed, though when she glanced at him, she found he was looking at her rather than the scenery. They sat side by side on the rock, close but not touching, listening to the gentle gurgle of the water and the distant call of night birds. "I want to be honest with you, Josephine," Xavier said after a time. "I've had feelings for you since before Thomas died." The confession stunned her. "Before," Xavier nodded, his profile strong in the moonlight, "I never would have acted on them. I respected your marriage. But yes, from almost the first time I saw you in town, something about you called to me. Your dignity, your quiet strength, the way you carried yourself." "You never said anything," Josephine murmured. "How could I?" he asked simply. "You were married, and happily so. It wasn't my place to speak. After Thomas died, it still wasn't my place, not while your grief was so fresh. So I did what I could. Brought wood, fixed things around your house when they needed it. It was all I could offer." Josephine remembered those quiet acts of kindness, how they had sustained her through the darkest days of her grief. "Why tell me this now?" Xavier turned to face her fully. "Because I want you to understand that what I feel isn't new or sudden. It's not born from pity or convenience. It's real, Josephine, as real as anything I've ever felt." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he assured her. "I'm not asking for declarations or promises, just time. Time to show you who I am, time for you to decide if there could ever be a place for me in your heart." Josephine looked out over the creek, the water silver in the moonlight. "Thomas and I used to come here sometimes," she said softly. "In the summer, when the days were too hot to bear. We'd wade in the shallows and talk about the future. All the things we'd do once the mine paid off." Xavier was silent, allowing her the space to speak of her husband without awkwardness or jealousy. "The last time we came here was 3 days before the collapse," she continued, the memory both painful and precious. "He was so excited. They'd found a new vein, and he was certain this was the one that would make our fortune." A tear slipped down her cheek. "He promised me a house in San Francisco with a view of the bay." Xavier reached out hesitantly, brushing the tear away with his thumb. "He loved you very much." "He did," Josephine agreed. "And I loved him. That's what makes this so difficult, Xavier. I don't know if I can love again. I don't know if I should." "Loving again doesn't diminish what you had with Thomas," Xavier said gently. "It honors it. It says that he taught you how to love so well that even his death couldn't take that away from you." His words touched something deep within her, a truth she hadn't been able to articulate even to herself. "You're very wise for a cowboy," she said, attempting to lighten the moment. Xavier's laugh was warm in the cool evening air. "Not wise. Just someone who's had his share of loss and learned that the heart is more resilient than we give it credit for." They sat together a while longer, the conversation turning to lighter topics: Xavier's work at the ranch, Josephine's garden, the upcoming Founders' Day celebration in town. By the time they walked back to her house, Josephine felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. At her door, Xavier took her hand in his touch respectful and warm. "May I call on you again?" "Yes," Josephine replied without hesitation. "I'd like that very much." The days that followed established a pattern. Xavier would work at the ranch during the day, then ride into town several evenings a week to spend time with Josephine. Sometimes they walked by the creek, other times they sat on her porch, talking until the stars came out. Occasionally, they would have dinner at Clara's cafe, deliberately facing the curious stares and whispers of the townspeople, until gradually, their courtship became an accepted fact rather than a scandalous novelty. 6 weeks after Josephine had decided to stay in Silvercreek, Xavier invited her to visit the Broken Arrow Ranch. "Pearson's been asking to meet you," he explained, "and I'd like to show you the place." The idea both excited and intimidated Josephine. Visiting Xavier at the ranch seemed like crossing another threshold in their relationship, making things even more official in the eyes of the community. "I'd be honored," she said after a moment's consideration. "When?" "Sunday after church. I can bring the buggy into town for you." Sunday arrived clear and warm, a perfect late spring day. After the church service, during which Josephine was acutely aware of Xavier sitting just 2 pews behind her, He brought around a well-maintained buggy pulled by a handsome bay horse. "Your chariot awaits," he said with a smile, helping her up into the seat. The Broken Arrow Ranch lay 7 miles outside of town, and as they traveled, Xavier pointed out landmarks and boundaries, his voice animated with pride and knowledge. Josephine found herself captivated by his passion for the land. "It's beautiful country," she observed as they crested a hill that revealed a broad valley dotted with grazing cattle, a cluster of buildings nestled against the base of a rocky outcropping. "It is," Xavier agreed. "When I first came here from Texas, I thought Arizona was just desert and cacti, but this high country, it has a beauty all its own." As they approached the ranch buildings, Josephine saw a stooped, white-haired man watching their arrival from the porch of the main house. Xavier raised a hand in greeting. "That's Pearson," he explained. "Ornery as they come, but with a heart of gold underneath all that bluster." Pearson met them at the hitching post, his roomy eyes sharp with interest as Xavier helped Josephine down from the buggy. "So this is the widow who's had you riding into town every chance you get," he said without preamble, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Mr. Pearson, may I present Mrs. Josephine Vance," Xavier said formally. "Josephine, this is Roland Pearson, owner of the Broken Arrow and the finest cattleman in the territory." "Flattery won't get you a raise, boy," Pearson grumbled, but Josephine caught the glint of amusement in his eyes. He turned to her with an evaluating gaze. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Vance. This one here speaks highly of you. Too highly, if you ask me, but I reckon that's what happens when a man gets moon-eyed." Josephine felt herself blush but met his gaze steadily. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Pearson. Xavier has told me much about you and this beautiful ranch." "Has he now?" Pearson looked pleased despite himself. "Well, come on in out of the sun. Maria's got dinner nearly ready, and she'll have my hide if we let it get cold." The main house was surprisingly comfortable inside, with solid furniture and colorful woven rugs covering the plank floors. Maria, Pearson's housekeeper, a stout Mexican woman who had apparently been with him for decades, served a hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. Throughout the meal, Pearson asked Josephine direct, sometimes uncomfortably personal questions about her life, her time in Silvercreek, and her plans for the future. Xavier occasionally tried to intervene, but Josephine handled the interrogation with grace, answering honestly without revealing more than she was comfortable sharing. After dinner, while Maria served coffee and apple pie, Pearson suddenly addressed Xavier. "Why don't you show Mrs. Vance that special project of yours while I rest these old bones for a spell?" Xavier's eyes widened slightly. "Are you sure?" Pearson waved a dismissive hand. "Go on, daylight's wasting." Xavier stood, offering Josephine his hand. "There's something I'd like to show you if you're willing." Intrigued, Josephine followed him outside and back to the buggy. They drove for about 10 minutes, following a narrow track that wound through a stand of pines before opening onto a small clearing. There, nestled against a gentle slope with a view of the valley below, stood the frame of a house, just the skeleton of walls and roof beams, but unmistakably the beginning of a home. Xavier drew the buggy to a halt and helped Josephine down, watching her face anxiously as she took in the sight. "You're building a house," she said, stating the obvious as her mind raced to understand the implications. "I am," he confirmed. "Started it about 2 months ago, working on it whenever I can spare time from ranch duties." 2 months ago, just before he had stopped her from leaving Silvercreek. The timing was not lost on Josephine. "It's for you, isn't it?" she asked softly. "This is the home you hope to bring a wife to someday." Xavier nodded, suddenly looking nervous in a way she had never seen him. "Yes, though when I started it, I wasn't sure that wife would be you. I just knew I needed to be ready if you ever gave me a chance." Josephine walked slowly toward the structure, taking in the solid foundation, the carefully hewn timbers. "May I?" "Of course," Xavier said, following a few steps behind, giving her space to explore. She entered through what would eventually be the front door, finding herself in a large open space with rough plank flooring. This will be the main room, living room and kitchen, Xavier confirmed. Through there will be 2 bedrooms. And I've designed it so we could add more rooms later if needed. A flush crept up his neck as he realized the implication of his words. Josephine moved through the skeleton of the house, envisioning walls and windows, a stove, curtains blowing in a summer breeze. She could almost hear the sounds that might fill this space conversation, laughter, perhaps someday the patter of small feet. "It's lovely, Xavier," she said honestly, turning to face him. "You've put a great deal of thought into it." "I have," he acknowledged. "I wanted it to be right. Something to be proud of." Josephine looked around once more, then back at Xavier, seeing the hope and uncertainty in his eyes. "When do you think it will be finished?" "By fall, if I work every spare moment," he said. "Sooner if Pearson lets me take on extra help." Josephine nodded, her heart racing as she considered her next words carefully. "That seems like a reasonable timeline." Xavier's brow furrowed. "Reasonable?" Taking a deep breath, Josephine stepped closer to him. "Yes, reasonable. A proper mourning period is typically a year and a half. By fall, it will have been 2 years since Thomas passed." Understanding dawned in Xavier's eyes, but he seemed afraid to hope. "Josephine, are you saying?" "I'm saying," she interrupted gently, "that if a man were to ask a certain widow a very important question by the time this house is finished, she might be ready to say yes." Joy spread across Xavier's face, transforming it completely. He closed the distance between them and took her hands in his. "Josephine Vance, you have made me the happiest man in the Arizona Territory." "I haven't said yes yet," she reminded him with a small smile. "No," he agreed, "but you've given me hope, and that's more precious than gold." In that moment, standing in the unfinished house that represented their possible future, Josephine felt the last of her resistance melt away. Xavier Nichols was not Thomas, and what she felt for him was different from what she had shared with her husband. But it was real and true and growing stronger with each passing day. "May I kiss you, Josephine?" Xavier asked, his voice hushed with reverence. Instead of answering, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief but perfect, a promise of things to come, a new beginning rising from the ashes of grief. When they parted, Xavier's eyes shone with emotion. "I will spend every day making you happy, Josephine. That's my solemn vow. And I will spend every day being grateful that I didn't get on that stagecoach," she replied. "That my tears that morning led to this moment." They stood together in the golden afternoon light, surrounded by the framework of their future home, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds in the vast expanse of the Arizona Territory. Outside, the wild landscape stretched to the horizon, beautiful and unforgiving. But here, within these 4 unfinished walls, they had created a sanctuary of possibility. 3 months later, on a crisp October morning, Josephine Vance became Josephine Nichols in a simple ceremony at Silvercreek's small church. Martha Holden stood as her witness, while Roland Pearson, leaning heavily on a cane but beaming with pride, stood for Xavier. That evening, Xavier brought his bride to their completed home on Broken Arrow land. As he carried her across the threshold, Josephine felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged, not in St. Louis, not in the past, but here, with this man who had followed her with his heart when she had tried to leave. "Welcome home, Mrs. Nichols," Xavier whispered, setting her gently on her feet in their living room, now furnished with a mix of her possessions from town and new pieces Xavier had either made or purchased. "It's perfect," she said, taking in the warm, inviting space that so perfectly blended their 2 lives. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new bedroom, Xavier traced the curve of Josephine's cheek with gentle fingers. "Do you remember what I said to you that day at the stagecoach? You said your heart leaves with me," Josephine recalled softly. "It was true then, and it's true now," Xavier said. "Wherever you go, my heart goes too. It always will." Josephine nestled closer to him, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "Then I shall have to stay right here," she murmured. because my heart has found its home with yours." Outside their window, the vast Arizona sky sparkled with countless stars, witnesses to the love that had bloomed in the most unexpected of circumstances, a love that had begun with tears, and a stagecoach that departed empty, carrying away an old life and leaving room for a new one to grow in its place.